It's Thursday, it's sunny, and we are in Fulham for a Retail Media Thursday with David Billings from EPAM. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday.
It actually is a Thursday. I think this is one of the first times we've filmed on a Thursday. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for having me. My name is David Billings. I am Vice President of Digital Marketing Solutions at EPAM. EPAM is, for those who don't know, is a relatively large professional services company. We're about 55,000 people globally. Probably about 45,000 of those are in very technical specialisms, so kind of specialisms oriented around software engineering, so engineers, data scientists, that kind of thing. The big focus for EPAM is on building custom technology solutions for enterprise clients, and that's hence the kind of the bulk of our people being focused on that kind of developer type role. The other roughly 10,000 are in more kind of business facing functions, a bit more consultative, and that's kind of where I sit, and our job is really to make sure that the solutions that we're building are very business focused and really deliver transformational value for our clients. In terms of my background, I have a background in ad tech. I was back at Rocket Fuel back in the day when they were still around. I spent a number of years at Accenture, so I set up and ran their digital media consultancy business in the UK and Ireland. And then I spent a few very formative years at dunnhumby, where I was accountable for building and rolling out their omni-channel retail media platform, which is obviously a very useful experience for the world of retail media. And now at EPAM, my role kind of covers two broad areas. One is focused on advertiser solutions. So given what I just said about EPAM, it's probably not a surprise to know what we do is primarily build custom technology solutions, custom platforms for very large advertisers, typically people who are spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars on advertising, for whom it makes sense to invest in their own kind of bespoke solution. But we also do something quite similar for large retailers. So we do a lot of work with retailers, often at the point at which they're hitting kind of scalability challenges. They've got their retail media network off the ground. They're working with some great technology vendors, but they're looking at what they need to do, particularly the kind of technology that they need to develop over the top of that in order to scale further. And obviously we'll get into a bit more of specifically what we do as we go through the chat today.
Yeah, let's come back to that. For now, which pub are we in and why did we choose it?
Well, we're in the Rose. I regret to say, for the proprietors of the Rose, the reason that we're here is that the pub that I'd originally chosen, which was 2 minutes down the road from my house, so I chose it very selfishly. Unfortunately, didn't get back to us allowing us to film, but we're in this very lovely pub, the Rose, and the main reason is, unfortunately, as I say, I've been selfish and it's somewhere close to home.
It's great. It's also close to me. Anywhere in southwest London works for me. And what's been your peak of the week?
My peak of the week? I would say, on the professional side, we have been having some really interesting discussions with a couple of new prospective clients. I love the point of our projects where we get into actually delivering stuff and we can see the value that we're kind of generating for our clients. But actually, I also love those first few discussions when you can start to unpick, what are the problems that you are facing, and there's almost this kind of creative approach, particularly, with the ability to pull in these kind of big teams of very, very smart people who have these kind of cross-functional skills and can build pretty much anything. Starting that process by getting into business problems and then getting to that kind of creative view of like, what could we build to solve your problems is really fun. So that's been very rewarding.
Yeah, that's cool. What about personally?
Well, it's yet to come. So tomorrow I will shut down my laptop for a couple of weeks and then I'll be off for 2 weeks on the family holiday. So I'm kind of preparing for that and very much looking forward to that.
Perfect. Well, let's not ruin one of my quickfire questions because it was actually
related
in the sun. So switching to retail media.
Yeah.
You mentioned you work with a lot of these retailers who are kind of facing these scalability challenges. I think there's a lot of talk in the industry right now around kind of the advertisers struggling to scale because of the complexity with the number of retail media networks. I think there's a lot less press around the complexities that the retailers are actually facing in doing this. So can you share your thoughts on like some of the challenges that you're hearing from them and the pain points that you're seeing that they face?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say the challenges that advertisers face, and with my role kind of working on both the advertiser side and the retailer side, I kind of see this is almost two sides of the same coin. They both actually wrestle with quite similar challenges around working with lots of different technology solutions, lots of different data environments, and figuring out how they can invest money in an effective way. If you're an advertiser, obviously you're doing that because it's your money and you want a return. If you're a retailer, you're doing that on behalf of your advertisers often so that you can generate better returns and they spend more money with you. But for retailers, in a sense, that challenge is compounded because advertisers have been at this game, advertising, since they've been around. For retailers, this is often a very new business. So you've got these very mature organizations that are very good at being retailers, and there is now this huge pressure to very quickly spin up these new high margin, very, very appealing lines of revenue. but you don't necessarily have a model to look to of how to do that. And actually, if you look at a lot of the events that happen around retail media, and there are an awful lot of them, you look at who is presenting at those. You have advertisers talking, you have technology partners talking about how good their technology solutions are. But when retailers are up on stage, obviously they are selling their solutions to their suppliers. They're talking about the functionality that you get as a supplier. They're not talking about what happens behind the curtain. They're not talking about the tech that they've developed that helps them operate their business better. They're not talking about their processes and operating models. So actually, if you're a retailer starting out in this, there aren't really many archetypes to look at. You know that Walmart are very mature, you know that Tesco are, been at this for a very long time, but you don't necessarily know what happens behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so everyone's kind of making it up as they go along. And what we often see is that it's not necessarily that difficult to get your retail media network off the ground and start some revenue flowing. But most retailers will hit a point when they're generating, whatever it is for them, it could be 5 million or 50 billion pounds of revenue, depending on how big they are. They will hit a point at which scalability becomes a challenge. And often the underlying issue is that they have almost organically built out a very complex technology ecosystem, lots of different vendors, each focusing on, it could be a different channel, it could be a different part of the value chain, like audience creation or finance and billing. Some of this stuff is not necessarily the glamorous stuff. It could be, back office process. And unless those systems are well integrated, actually you have large teams of operational people frantically cranking the handles, trying to make this appear like a kind of coherent proposition, but behind the scenes it's often not. And the challenge that we often help retailers solve is that challenge of orchestrating that complexity and helping to streamline it. And for every retailer, I would say at a certain point, you're going to run into that as an issue.
Yeah, we're hearing it more and more. We're having a lot of conversations at the moment in the US with retailers. One of them actually told us last week that they left eight digits of budget on the table because they just couldn't spend it.
We hear that a lot. Sometimes we'll go in and talk to retailers who on the surface or as they present themselves are very, very mature, and you talk to their sales team and they say, we're running a $200 million business on Excel, help. And so often behind the scenes it's much more chaotic than it looks.
Yeah, it's like the iceberg analogy. It all looks calm on top, but underneath.
And of course no one wants to admit it, so everyone thinks that they're the ones that are uniquely kind of struggling with these issues, but everyone is flying blind, everyone's doing the same thing.
How are they starting to solve for it? What kind of strategies and solutions are they putting in place?
So the work that we typically do with retailers to help them mitigate these challenges is often around building integration layers. So there is lots of fantastic third-party technology out there, lots of software solutions that can help you do things like manage campaigns effectively or manage your financial processes. But if those aren't well integrated, as I said, it becomes pretty challenging. So often what we will do with retailers is work on typically cloud integration layers that can sit on top of all of that third-party technology and can effectively help them to orchestrate it better. So, you can build APIs often now into the individual retail media partners, and you can then think about building an orchestration layer that allows you to integrate more effectively, but also think about focusing on developing solutions that add value for you specifically. So, an example might be that often retailers will work on audience creation at a channel level. You'll build an audience in your on-site display solution. You'll build an audience that you can ship out to your off-site solution. And it might make sense for a retailer to think about doing that within their own cloud environment. Build an audience once and then distribute it to all of your different partners. And so thinking about what makes sense to elevate above the channel-specific technology and thinking about where you can really add value at that level is often the kind of path that we see retailers going down. Sometimes they'll go all the way to releasing their own kind of self-service portals where you get a kind of retailer branded portal that as an advertiser you can log into. It's not right for every retailer. If you're not a very large retailer, you might not be able to justify that complexity for the advertiser of having to log into yet another solution. But there's often things that even if you don't go that far, you can do to help you operate your own business more effectively with your own internal tooling.
I used to do a lot of work with SAP, and it's almost like we need an ERP for the retail media network.
100%, and that's often there. It's often just quite disconnected, and so you often got, you come to kind of month end, and you'll have a team of 5 poor people who are desperately trying to generate invoices manually, and it's a horrible job, and it's very focused at certain parts of your kind of life cycle. You'll do it towards month end, and then those people are sitting around without much to do in the interim. So automating even those kind of, as I say, less glamorous back office processes can often be a big help.
Yeah. One of the other trends that we're seeing is retailers kind of thinking about this kind of convergence between retail media and their own marketing and promotional strategies. What are you hearing from them and seeing kind of in that area? Like what challenges, what problems are they facing? What are they encountering there?
So I absolutely agree that that's a new trend that we're seeing. And the conversations that we're having at the moment with retailers either tend to be helping them solve that first kind of category of problem that I discussed that's around scaling and reducing kind of complexity, perhaps generating some differentiation for your proposition because you can build better audiences or you can measure incremental ROAS more scalably than your competitors. And there's a lot of value to be had there, and for a lot of retailers that's still something that they need to look at seriously. For the retailers that have been focusing on that for a year or two and feel like they have got some level of maturity there, the second category of problem that we're helping them solve is how do I integrate retail media with my broader kind of touch point strategy, exactly as you said. And the challenge that we often see is that retail media will be very, very focused on monetization revenue. But of course, alongside that, you've got lots of adjacent business functions that are focused on slightly more nuanced business objectives, like how do I maximize customer lifetime value or basket size, or how do I maximize margin or grow a category? If you've got a particular category that you think is going to be big this summer, you want to focus on bringing people into that category for the first time. And so retail media can often exist in a silo alongside that. And what we're starting to see is people ask, and I wouldn't say anyone's really solved this yet, but probably 4 or 5 quite mature retailers have initiated this conversation over the last few months. How do I build a better integration between those two? How do I build a view of how retail media is also influencing people who are new to category, also influencing customer lifetime value? And the solutions that often need to be quite complex, because what you often need to do is build this kind of almost air traffic control system that allows you to get that integrated view of how all of your channels influence all of these metrics. But if you've got that in place, then you can start to be quite smart, and you might be able to see that for a particular ad slot, advertiser A might be willing to bid more than advertiser B. So in a normal world, you'd say, let's go with the highest bid. But if you can see that advertiser B might entice someone to enter a category for the first time, you might be willing to sacrifice some retail media revenue because you know that you're going to get more lifetime value out of that customer. Building that is not simple. And I'd say most retailers are early on, but that's absolutely the direction of travel that we see this going in.
Yeah, the incrementality and omni-channel, it's kind of the 2 biggest buzzwords that we hear a lot, and it kind of plays back to both of those things. Another big topic, AI. I don't think we can have one of these conversations without talking about that. So I think, and we're seeing it come up in kind of 2 senses, like your traditional machine learning type AI, and then also generative AI.
Yep.
How are the retailers that you're talking to kind of thinking about this? How are they starting to approach it and integrate it into their strategies?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It took us, 10 minutes to raise AI, so I think we did pretty well. Most retailers have, whether they've been thinking about it or not, have been working with some form of traditional machine learning since they launched their retail media network. Most of the retail media platforms out there have, ML integrated into their bidding algorithms, for example, or into their segmentation tools. So often it's there in the background. What is interesting is that the very obvious new wave of interest in AI in general is also causing retailers to look again at things like ML and think about how they can use that more effectively. So even though these machine learning models as a concept may not be very new at all, retailers are now thinking, okay, well, how can I use AI effectively? And one of the first things they might look at is, how could I apply machine learning to build smarter segmentation models in my own cloud environment? How can I start to bake in signals from across the enterprise, not just what people bought last week, but what we think they're going to buy in the future, what margin we think they're going to drive, those kind of KPIs I referenced earlier. So that's one thing, but I think what's really interesting is how that is starting to intersect with generative AI. And there are obvious applications for generative AI, like building creative. I think in retail media, there is particular complexity around that, which means Gen AI could be particularly useful. And an example would be, retailers are rightly very sensitive about the content, the advertising content that's shown on their e-commerce properties. As a retailer, you spend huge amounts of resource optimizing your e-com site to the nth degree to make sure the consumer experience is right. So the idea of a third party injecting content into that site, it kind of creates a tension. Yeah. And what you often see with retailers is you get this hugely laborious process where the retailer will say, well, these are my brand guidelines, and no one can put content on my site unless they adhere to them. And then you get a brand that's obviously got its own very clear brand guidelines and has spent a huge amount of money building its creative, is spending money with the retailer, and reconciling those two can often be a very challenging process and very laborious. You often see lots of back and forth and people having to manually adjust creative. So one use case that we've seen come up a couple of times is the ability to almost use the kind of brand model for the retailer, the brand model for the brand, and use generative AI to create an ad that is compatible with those two. So you shortcut some of that process. So that's one. But coming back to the idea of the kind of intersection of generative AI and machine learning, ML models can be very, very powerful, but the two challenges that people often have with working with them is that either they're very black box, so give us your budget and we'll just optimize the campaign, and people sometimes don't like taking their hands away from the kind of controls in quite that way. The other is that you might also need someone with a PhD in data science to build and run those ML models. So the intersection between the two that's really interesting is where you almost have the ability now to talk to your data. So you can interrogate campaign data conversationally. You can speak to a model that is able to give you insights, but you can also potentially plan campaigns conversationally. So in the back end, you have machine learning models that are very good at predicting how you should distribute your budget across the retailers' different channels. But on the front end, you've then got this conversational interface. So as a brand manager, you can just say, I've got £10,000 to spend, tell me how I should plan that. I want to maximize sales for this particular brand. How should I distribute that budget? And you can then start to get into a conversation with the model that actually generates that budget in the best way for you. And obviously you can say, well, actually I want to put a bit more on this channel or on that channel. It makes it a much more streamlined process. So the generative piece in that sense is it's the shiny bit on front. The hard work is still done by the ML model, but by making that model more accessible and easier to interact with, you create a lot more value from it. And that's really interesting.
Yeah, I feel like the future is going to be, everyone's just going to be talking to the machines. They're not actually going to be setting things, they're going to be asking what to do, and then I feel like the machine will tell them that you need to take this action, and you'll be able to press a button and just do it rather than having to do things manually.
And at the moment we're seeing people being much more receptive to the idea of a co-pilot. So you're still in charge, but you've got your kind of assistant that's empowered all this data. I wonder where it will land in terms of what will be fully automated and what people want to keep control of. But I think, again, with the sensitivity of retailers around the content on their sites, you're always going to have that level of human governance.
It'll be interesting to see as well when consumers are interacting with the retailer sites that way. So, how they're thinking about GenAI from a shopping point of view.
Yeah, and I think the easy thing to bolt on is always build a chatbot. But I don't think that's it might be a starting point, but it's obviously not where it's going to end up. I think thinking about how the entire function of a website will change or whether websites will become obsolete is a kind of more interesting discussion.
Yeah. What are the strategic considerations? I guess that's probably one of them, but what are the other kind of strategic considerations that retailers are grappling with at the moment?
Around AI specifically? I think in terms of the principles, they're not necessarily so different from those that you would think about with any new technology. So I think one big one is the speed at which you should adopt. Is this an area where it makes sense to lead the market and be a first mover? Or actually, is this somewhere where it makes sense to be a kind of fast follower and see what others do and learn from that? And I think there's a couple of marketing organizations we've been talking to at big retailers who have either been burned or seen others be burned by trying to move very quickly around things like metaverse or NFTs. And while these might be concepts that do generate value over the midterm, they've seen some of the first movers who jumped on this spend lots of money and energy on building their own NFT and then not necessarily unlock that much value from it. So if you were kind of sitting back and saying, we know we need to jump on this, but we're going to wait a little and see. So I do think the interesting thing about AI and speed of adoption, though, is because of exactly as we're talking about this idea of kind of co-pilots and working with AI and how you work alongside these kind of AI agents, it's going to have such a profound impact on the way that businesses operate that actually moving quickly and learning how to cooperate with AI is valuable in itself. So even if the use cases or the functionality that you're adopting today aren't the ones that's going to generate this fabulous shareholder value, kind of embedding that approach within your organization still has value in itself. So I think doing these tests and learning how to work with these solutions is valuable, even if you're not doing the things that ultimately are going to change the world for you. So I think that's one, is kind of pace of adoption. The other really interesting one is how you access these solutions. You're seeing more native AI be embedded in third-party software. So when we spoke about ML models being in pretty much every kind of retail media solution, I think you'll see more and more generative AI embedded in retail media solutions. So the easy way to work with AI is you license a software solution that has it embedded, and hey, you're working with AI. One consideration, though, is where you want to house the models. And for a number of retailers, there's this big concern that actually you don't want to be fueling models that reside in third-party environments, because then these are tremendously valuable things, and you then might get into a situation where you're locked into a vendor that you don't want to be locked into because you've spent 2 years training a model that's incredibly valuable for your business. So that's kind of one consideration, is where the IP resides. The other is where the data resides. These models are only as powerful as the data that fuels them. coming back to our discussion around not just kind of optimizing campaigns for immediate revenue, but utilizing signals from across the business around things like margin and customer lifetime value, or even supply chain. These are very diverse data signals. You don't necessarily want to be shipping all of those signals into a third-party ad tech provider. And so for a lot of retailers, there's this kind of thought that actually we should be doing this in an environment where that data already exists, which is typically their cloud environment. And happily for the retailer, those environments are often very cost effective. And often they provide access to best-in-class models anyway. So actually you've got the kind of tools there in this environment that you own, where your data already resides, and where, if you're building models there, you will retain the IP to that. You kind of own those models. And so it takes a bit more effort, obviously, than just using a third-party solution. But for the most kind of forward-thinking retailers that we're working with, that's definitely the approach they're taking, where there's such strategic value in this, there's such sensitivity around it. They want to be the ones that are owning it. And I think you'll see more and more of that.
It's exciting and also terrifying.
I totally agree, and often at the same time. Totally agree.
I actually had a demo of our Copilot that we're building yesterday, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is just the beginning.
Yeah,
this is incredible.
We often see same thing from big technology vendors. They will very excitedly show us what they've built, and it often is tremendously exciting, but at the same time, it's also somewhat terrifying, the pace of change.
Yeah. I'm not sure your children, my niece.
It's going to be a very different world.
It's going to be so weird. I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah. Never mind smartphones. The world is going to change radically.
Right, completely. Yeah. So that's the end of the retail media questions. Now on to my favourite bit, the quickfire.
Go for it.
You're going on holiday tomorrow, but what is your dream holiday destination?
So, at the moment, we're at a point where, with small children, we're a little bit constrained around what we do. But I would say my dream holiday destination is going up into the mountains. I love outdoorsy activities, I love trail running, and I think for me, being situated somewhere with good food, I think maybe somewhere in the Italian mountains, maybe good food, beautiful scenery, where you could also access some beautiful mountains and go out and do some really long runs would be absolutely ideal. But unfortunately, it's not very compatible with having a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, so I'll have to park that one for now.
I'm actually climbing Scarfall this weekend.
That's jealous.
It'll be great. So you're going on holiday, going to be sat by the pool. If you were stuck there for the rest of your life and could only have 3 alcoholic drinks, what would they be?
I think 3 is quite generous, I'll take that. So, I mean, it's going to be a hot location. I would definitely go for a cold beer. Yeah. I'd probably, if I have to be more specific than that, I'd probably go for a lager. Just to, always good. I would also go for red wine, which is definitely my go-to. Maybe something from Burgundy, a Pinot Noir from Burgundy.
Very nice.
And then I guess I would have to go for a cocktail, probably a Negroni. Nice punchy cocktail, again, good in the sunshine.
Good choices.
Italian vibes.
You're stuck with those for the rest of your life now.
I'd be all right. I'd be fine with that. Very happy.
Your favourite retail store? We talked a lot about retail today, but what's your favourite?
Well, given I work with a large number of different retailers, I feel like this is quite a loaded question. I might get in trouble with some of my clients. This is genuinely quite a tough one, and I'm
If you're going to have a lifetime supply of goods from any retail store, which one would it be?
I'm a big fan of Patagonia. Does that count as a retail store? Can I go with that? Yeah. So
they've got great values. That is not going to offend anybody.
Having read the book Let My People Go Surfing, which is the best kind of got a wasp joining us, which is the best kind of soft marketing tool for a brand that I think I've ever read. I would go for Patagonia. Cool values, great quality stuff, and ties in well with the lifestyle I quite like.
Are you watching the Olympics?
Not as much as I would like. Bits. Go on.
I was going to test you and see how many golds have we won.
Oh, I know that yesterday we moved up the medal table. I know that we got a gold in the women's quad, but I don't know. I'm going to guess something like 6.
Yes.
Is it 6?
Yeah, well done.
Fantastic. I got lucky.
Good guess. And I've got a whole list of ones here. We're in Fulham. Fulham or Chelsea?
Well, I would go Fulham because I live or specifically on the kind of Parsons Green side, but I live in Fulham, so I'm going to go Fulham.
You know who goes to Parsons Green a lot?
Who's that?
Kelly Jones from Stereophonics.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Ah.
Have you ever spotted him?
I wouldn't recognise
Who's your
them.
best celebrity spot in Fulham?
Best celebrity spot? I don't know if I've seen any celebrities in Fulham, which probably says more about my lack of kind of being plugged into celebrity culture than it does about the celebrities not being there. But I'm not sure if I've seen any.
Well, watch out for Kelly Jones.
Oh, well, I'll keep my eyes on
and then give him my phone number.
Yeah, okay. I'll do that.
Well, it has been good chatting.
Pleasure.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.